Hi, everyone. Now that the school year is sort of winding down, there's a lot of retrospection that goes into how the year went, what we need to improve in our schools, and maybe some of the steps that we need to take. Of course, one of the problems that we have if we're administrators or even classroom teachers is sort of the whack-a-mole. I mean, there might be so many little things or even big things that we want to try to address going into the next academic year. Where do you start? Really, one of the ways you have to do that is to think about your system as a system, not just as a series of issues that you want to address. We're going to be talking about that systemic approach on today's Teaching Matters.
Welcome to Teaching Matters, a podcast exploring all things teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio. And here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Dean of the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University.
Thank you so much, Trinity. Joining me today is Angelique Nedved. She's the president and CEO of SchoolSmartKC. SchoolSmartKC is a public charity located in Kansas City, Missouri, that has the mission of strategically investing in Kansas City schools to close achievement gaps while working also in collaboration with families and community stakeholders. Successes of the organization include expansion of teaching staff across the system, as well as the creation of a $6.4 million citywide literacy plan funded by philanthropic investors, among other achievements of the organization that we'll learn about. Before joining SchoolSmartKC, Angelique was a teacher and administrator in school districts across the border in the state of Kansas. Angelique, it's really great to meet you, and I'm excited to hear about the story of SchoolSmart Kansas City.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Scott. Thank you.
I want to start just by learning a little bit more about you. You grew up in Kansas City, is my understanding, and you went through that school system, and you achieved your education in that area as you got your teacher licensure and that sort of thing. What was your journey going from when you were growing up? How did you get into education in the first place, and then how did you end up going from working in buildings as a teacher or principal to now being the head of a nonprofit?
Great question. I don't get that asked very much, the journey. So I actually started my professional career in an entirely different industry. And by where I was living, that industry didn't have a lot of opportunity. So taking a look at my surroundings and what was available, I decided to jump into the profession of education. I'd always enjoyed school myself, had several effective and teachers that impacted me. So I went back to school as an adult and found that I had a love for working in the classroom and working inside schools. Became a teacher in my mid-20s and had a real breadth of experience. I was teaching elementary, middle, and high school every day for 10 years and across 3 different content areas. So I had a rich experience to get to know students, my families, the community, and watch that learning trajectory across a student's educational experience.
And you made the transition into administration, if I remember correctly, in Lawrence Public Schools. Is that right?
Absolutely. I moved to Lawrence to become a building principal, and from there had the opportunity to join the district when instruction as a category in districts was just taking off. There was a deep dive into instruction as it was getting its own sort of footing around curriculum. So we were not only talking about the what we wanted students to learn, but how we were teaching them. And that was of a lot of interest to me. So I had the benefit to design a coaching program for Lawrence and bring together a lot of different coaching roles that we had in that space, and learned a lot about creating systems that support not only our adults, but our students, and took that with me as I moved into superintendency and then joined SchoolSmart in 2017 as they were looking for another staff member. School quality was the focus of that position, and I took the leap of faith. I have an entrepreneurial spirit, and I was really curious about this type of organization supporting Kansas City.
Absolutely. So as I was learning about School Smart Kansas City. It's interesting because you're obviously working directly with the Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools, but yet as I understand it, you're not directly affiliated with them. You are a nonprofit that sort of provides assistance. Can you just talk about how that relationship works? Because, I think that a lot of listeners will be familiar with the local public schools and the school board and how that works together in conjunction with the state. You're sort of a different organization though. So how does that relationship sort of work in a, mutually supportive relationship?
Yeah, so we are not a school. We don't run a school, and we're not a funder, but we are, think of us as the connective tissue across the Kansas City public education system. And we have the honor and the privilege of sitting in that space to be a convener and a collaborator. And I think it helps to understand, to step back a little bit and get a little bit of detail on the system. So there are 20 governing districts in the Kansas City public education system. So that's both the district, Kansas City Public Schools, and 19 charters. And they all have their own governing board. And you think about what that can create, and fragmentation comes to mind. And then you stop and you think about who we serve, and that's the families in the community. So that entire system of all those 20 different public schools serves about 28,500 students, with a third of them mobile each year. So mobility is high, and students are moving across that system continuously. And you think about, how do we serve them best? We sit in that space of convening to get the entire community to look at common goals and think about their investments with our philanthropic partners.
Talk a little bit more about Kansas City as a urban metropolitan area. I think having grown up near Kansas City, I know it well. But the school system in Kansas City, Missouri, is very much like other urban school districts. And so what are some of the challenges that you feel like are rising to the top of what it is that the city as a whole has to really work on?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up. So in Kansas City, students make up about 20% of our population, but I like to think of it as 100% of our future. Yet there are too many barriers that they face on a day-to-day basis. So poverty, housing instability, the inequitable access to strong educational systems, and those realities are visible all around us. So one thing that we ground ourselves in is, if you think about it, across the nation, we have about 1 in 4 adults that are not operating at a functional literate level. So if we apply that to the bi-state region in Kansas City, that comes to about 290,000 adults that don't have that functional literacy level that allows them to operate day to day with something as simple as prescription medication or job applications or even a voting ballot.
Interesting. So as you think about what you just listed as being, one of the paramount challenges, which is, in a general sense, it's students growing into adulthood and not having some of the basic skills that are necessary. It's a really good way of sort of boiling it down. As you think about some of the things that individual buildings or individual districts are facing, what are some of the feeder causes that might be contributing to that? I mean, you mentioned poverty, which and then equity to access as being two. Are there others that sort of come to mind? And in context of my question, like where I live in Athens, Ohio, we're a rural school, and our challenge is being able to find enough teachers, but then also simultaneously having budget authority from the state to be able to hire them, right? And so all of those things contribute. What are some of the things like that in Kansas City that might come to mind?
Well, one thing we need to keep in mind is no single school creates the literacy crisis that we're in right now, but no single school can fix it. And you think about leaders change, programs change, and we even had the challenge of independent philanthropy funding various pieces and parts without having a common conversation across that. So I think what it did was it set our schools up for disparities between them, even though we had these students moving back and forth. Philanthropy not talking to each other about collective goals and a shared mission or vision, and the schools, competing for students and for the dollars. So that's what caused much of the fragmentation we've seen from a decade and decades ago. So you think about that again, I take us back to no single school caused this, because I think some of our human instinct is to want to point to something or someone, but then taking us back to why the system part is so important is, and no single school can fix that. Leaders will leave, and if you have just like an exceptional program that comes in with a particular leader and they leave, then that learning and that program typically leave with the leader. But if a system is built around the students and the adults, then that structure can stay.
So sort of delving in on that systemic approach, I do think that as I think about, other metropolitan areas that I'm familiar with, there is more of a individualized approach. Each district, sort of does its thing, and there might be some coordination with surrounding districts because, as you said, students are mobile, and so there has to be. But your organization, and in fact, we were talking about this before we started the recording, that your organization takes a systemic approach. And as a result of that, it means that there's a lot of potential ground that you have to cover if you're trying to elevate the educational experiences of students. So why do you think that systemic approach is so important? I mean, you mentioned fragmentation already. Maybe kind of delve into that about why that can create more problems than solutions, and why a systemic approach might be better for a geographic, area like a major city.
If you think about it, for too long our community has relied on short-term programs tied to grants or individual champions, specific leaders. Programs end, leaders change, and systems align long-term goals that can be collectively created. That means you get strength and connection. Each school can keep its identity. I think sometimes we suffer from systems equating to sameness, and we're not talking about every single school being similar or identical because they have the autonomy of their approach. And then every student can benefit from the power of the whole when the schools come together and collaborate and talk about, what is our shared vision, what is our shared goals that we want for our city. For example, let me drill down a little bit. We have a campaign right now for every elementary in our system, and there are 39, and we call it Literacy for All Students. Currently, we only have 40% of our schools participating as partners, and we are continuously out there gaining more. We're starting cohort 3 this August, but our citywide goal is to increase student literacy in third grade by 10%. We've all come to that collectively, and we agree on that. And when we share the data across the city, and we're talking stakeholders like civic and business leaders, school leaders, elected officials, and families coming together, understanding what the data is telling us, where we currently sit, so we can start from that common ground. We see the gaps, the same gaps at the same time. So it's a little harder to argue that your school is fine when everyone in the room is looking at the same numbers. So we are tracking that data, making sure that we are moving in the direction so we can achieve that 10% increase for our third graders, and we give ourselves 4 years. It's robust, it's ambitious, and that's one example of how we can bring that together.
It's really interesting because of how you and your organization sort of sits in this space of needing to not only think about the schools as I don't want to say client, but sort of in that mentality, at the same time that you're also thinking about investors that are helping to support the programs. That's an interesting space to be in the middle of. And I imagine that a lot of your role is to try to get people on the same page about setting goals and, trying to get schools on board to do. So what's your sales pitch? I mean, when you're talking with a new school and you have a superintendent or a principal that is reticent for whatever reason, maybe it's budget, maybe whatever. What's your sales pitch to them to say, look, we can do something big here if we all work together?
Yeah, there are tensions between our schools, and I call it healthy friction. So I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I think you talk to the collective and all of our investments and where we support. These are opt-in. And what we have done is we have listened to the community, and that includes our families, our educators, our business and industry, our elected officials, and you start to hear common trends and common threads through all of that, and then creating what then can be the common vision. So we've got a pretty historic, lively history that's instructive for us. At one time, KCPS had lost its accreditation. The charters were funded at 20 to 30% less than their peers. And we had some really powerful pieces come into play. The funding was able to get equalized. We just passed in April of 25 a historic bond for $474 million. So you are feeling that collective momentum and energy that, yes, we can do this together and we can accomplish. So I would say it's less of a sales pitch, but more about what's the win in this. When we're grounded with the data, for example, back to a third of our students are mobile. Yeah. So what you consider to be your students may be somebody else's students as you inherit additional students the next day. So continuing that narrative to help people understand that this is our community. So one of our I wouldn't call it the sales pitch, but one of our slogans is, these are our students in our city, and this is our future.
I certainly did not mean to denigrate your organization by using that phrase.
That's okay.
Thinking about the literacy program for third grade, if a school opts in, what does that look like in terms of their staff development, the resources, the curriculum that they're doing? So what is the impact of that for them on a daily basis?
So on a daily basis, that means they're surrounded with the resources that we know lead to success. So these are time-tested, research-based. It's not, there's no silver bullet or a panacea when it comes to curriculum. But what we do know is when we support our adults in the increase and effectiveness of their craft, and it's job embedded, it's not just a one-time sit and get type of professional development, that they grow and they understand and they make those progressions in their craft, in their delivery of instruction in the classroom. And we've seen some pretty big, you and I have been in the profession long enough, we've seen some pretty big pendulum swings. And now we know the science of reading is so highly effective. And those 5 strategies, when you read into research, 95% of the humans on this globe can learn how to read. But that doesn't mean that all of our teachers are prepared. So how do we support them in the setting? So that is an instructional coach focused on literacy for grades K through 3. It also means that our students still have some gaps to fill. So how do we ensure tutoring is in place for them so they can accelerate in their learning? And hearing directly from our families, they wanted that tutoring during the day, not before or after school, because there are complexities of life that don't make everybody available. So you want to think about the equity and the inclusion around those resources. Leadership, having come out of principalship myself and wearing that hat, is a very lonely and isolating position. So how do you increase your effectiveness as a leader to create a literacy-rich environment? So when I step into a classroom as a leader, what should I be looking for? What should the students sound and look like? And how can I further support the teachers? Another component there is making sure that our families are supported in learning about literacy strategies. They're eager, they're excited, they want to know, but they're not professional educators themselves. So we have a rich environment in Kansas City of organizations that focus on family practices in literacy. So partnering with them to support the school, because the school's heads down in instruction and making sure our students are learning every day. So how do we bring along those organizations to support our families? And then the last component I'll share with you is our business community, and they want to be as involved. So what does the joy and inspiration look like? You know, we've talked a lot of strategies around reading, because learning to decode is a pretty intense skill, but we also want our children to be excited about reading, to enjoy picking up a book, to get lost in, you know, the chapter and the characters. So how can we inspire the community to just wrap the arms around our schools and our educators to communicate and make sure that we talk about the joy of reading and how it can be inspirational?
I want to turn to that next, but before I do that, I just want to punctuate the answer that you just provided. I would encourage listeners and viewers to go back, rewind, and listen to that entire answer again, because, I mean, seriously, what you just described, going through not only all the different stakeholder groups that you have to think about, but then also the fact that you're integrating in the science of reading and, you know, staff development to be able to implement that. That idea of thinking systemically was encapsulated in that answer so effectively. And, you know,
You.
oh, well, I mean, you're the one that said it. You did a great job. And you know, I think that if you have other people that are either at a district level or a community level like you are, that's trying to think about how do we solve these big problems, I mean, you have to think that way. And you just wrapped it in a nice bow for people to go back and sort of check off all the things that were integrated into that answer to really think about something as fundamental as, you know, third grade reading improvement, all the things that go into that. Let's turn the coin and talk about the fact that Smart School Kansas City has a very impressive list of community supporters, partners. I think that's really interesting because you know, when I look at national news, there is a narrative out there that education is being denigrated, that people are not supporting education through property taxes, or they don't want to. There's complaints about this, that, and the other thing associated with teachers, and so there's this negative narrative that I think clouds people's perspectives on education. In Kansas City, you have community organizations that are supporting in ways that I think other metropolitan areas would, you know, be, you know, really interested in seeing how that's happening. So how do you sort of combat this, you know, potential negative national narrative and go to your partners in Kansas City and say, look, this is something that we have to rise up as a community to support, and that includes, you know, your organization, your company providing direct support for this cause?
Ooh, that's a big one, Scott. So there's a little bit of a flavor of the Kansas City way, and we know that some of the oxygen in education is the legislative component, and focusing on the public school system in Kansas City, you know, that's our lane. We don't lobby. But that said, systems change sometimes requires the policy change. We had some shifts that occurred in that space to give us some energy. The state stepped in and provided the letters training, a specific literacy focused strategy, coursework. But we knew that we needed to act now and quickly. And fortunately, we've got a strong funder base here in Kansas City. That is also the Kansas City way. How do we focus on Kansas City and get things done and not wait for policy and legislation that can take quite a bit of time to get in place? So we know we have funders interested in supporting our community, and it's getting in front of them with that narrative and with this is critical now. But then also that connective tissue, I'll bring us back to that. We're talking about a workforce 15 years earlier. And how do we ensure that when those youth, our students, our scholars graduate from high school, that they can turn around and see themselves with successful and strong opportunities And that seems to really connect with our business community, who are also at the same time philanthropists. And we have a lot of strong catalytic investors that stepped in and said, we know our individual investments weren't moving the needle in Kansas City. We have decades of results that just aren't where we want them to be. So that was part of us coming on board in 2017 when we had 3 core funders say, we need to do this as a system. We need an entity that can provide that quality assurance and hold us accountable to the goals that we're going to set together. And we have opportunities like getting with our partner, the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce by state, and getting in front of that constituency and sharing the narrative, sharing the data. One event that's one of our signature events is an annual data summit, and publicly available data through the State Education Association and organization, but it's not really translatable all the time when it comes in thousands of cells in an Excel sheet. So we take that and put it visually into something that the community can understand. So when you ground your conversations in that, and you talk about, this is Kansas City, what are we going to step up and do? And you talk about those who are stepping forward. For example, we had our first corporate sponsor come on board, and probably one that people wouldn't expect. It's a large global engineering firm, and they said, you know, we're in. We support literacy. Here's a plan that will hold us accountable, and it has measurable outputs and outcomes along the way. And having that as a plan that grounds us, I think has really increased the energy and the momentum around, these are our students, and this is going to be our future workforce.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed in what I would call where you identify the pillars for School Smart Kansas City. One of those pillars that I was interested in was sort of focused on how you're preparing educators and learners for what you call tomorrow's opportunities. I sort of read that as being the innovation pillar. That's my word, not yours, but that's the way I read it. Can you talk, and I think you were just starting to go down that path when you were talking about workforce development. What are some of the things that your organization is trying to, have be the action strategies associated with that pillar?
So we call that third pillar reimagining education, and it focuses both on our students and our adults in the profession. So I'll start with our students, and that means, where do I see myself as I graduate from high school? And is high school kind of the capstone of my experience in school? And what that means for us is ensuring that our schools have the opportunity to partner with organizations across Kansas City who are fully interested in exposing their industry, their career to students who are exploring and considering, what is next for me. And that can also come in the form of a dual credit, as I experience what university or college life could be like. But that's not the answer for all of our students. And some students want to get out into the working world right away. So how do we ensure that bridge between middle school and high school, even going far back as, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, for just exposure into what does that business and industry look like, and making sure that it's not a finite list of experiences, because Kansas City is rich with dozens and dozens of industries and even corporations that are headquartered there. So how do we ensure that our students have exposure to all of that so they can start to make some of those really big, meaty decisions as they prepare for graduation and come out of high school? So let's shift to our adults. As a passionate career educator myself, knowing that we struggle as an industry, and I don't know if it's more of messaging around that, but how do we ensure that we get adults into the profession that want to stay and want to continue to give to the community? A couple of ways we have found that to be really successful are Grow Your Own programs, and we partner with local university, UMKC, who's got a thriving program, and working with community to see who wants to stay in that profession, then get early exposure in high school. There are also different ways to think about how do we operate within a school building, and does it have to look like it's always looked for 30, 40, 50 years? Again, as long as you and I have been in the profession, does it have to continue to look like that? So we have explored additional opportunities with partners who are doing research in the space of, for example, team-based teaching and team-based staffing. You and I probably remember teaming as a term when you are talking about how you set up the schedule in the day, or team teaching. We also know department heads and those that kind of take the lead. But team-based staffing intrigued us enough that we went to Arizona State and connected with their programming there and their leaders to learn more about that, because we know we have finite resources, so we're not looking for something that costs, something that will send our budget overboard, but how do we look at what we're doing in the classroom differently, where you rely on the strengths and the brilliance of our educators, but it may not be everybody has all of the skills to work with a group of 25 students. So creatively, how do you group an asset map of all of your adults in the building, whether it's a volunteer or a practicum student or other individuals? How do we creatively group them together to support our students? So it's a little dabble into pillar 3 and what we're doing to look into how do we support our adults and the students, but we're really excited about that component of our mission and making sure that we don't kind of sit with the status quo of what we know teaching to be.
Yeah, when I was reading about that, and of course, I got a lot more from your answer, a lot more understanding of it. It struck me that as buildings, schools, districts are really struggling with staffing necessities, especially in the context of so many more students having IEPs and needing to have more individualized attention for a greater number of students as a result of that. I think you're right. I mean, I think the 50-year-old staffing model that has governed schools across the entire country can't be what we have going forward. We would never be able to catch up with the need if that was the approach. And so I think what you're describing about thinking about holistically the adults in the building and who they are and what assets they can bring is a really smart approach to a really big problem and one that's growing. And so I really applaud that. I think the last question I wanted to sort of throw out there with you is you think about the goals that you set for the system of Kansas City public education. You set the goals and you say that several of them are very aggressive. How do you know when you've sort of reached your objective? I mean, you talked about your data conference, and that's something that's highlighted on your website. And so I assume that public events like that are places where you could sort of mark those milestones. But it seems like, you as an organization, you have to set goals. And then how do you know when you've actually achieved it? Because that's in the context of, we've been chasing goals in education for forever. And, going back to John Dewey, right? And so, how do we know when we've gotten to a place where we've had that impact that we set out to go?
Such a great question and a complex one, because we know, as we don't run schools, if you stop and you look at our overall goals to increase the number of quality schools in Kansas City, and quality measured by our students growing and proficiency being on grade level. So we know all of the things that go behind that cannot be controlled by one entity. So by no means do we think that we have the ability to shift that. And I'll take us back to systems. It takes all of us to get to that goal. And it's no one organization alone. But one thing I have learned is that it's got to move beyond conversation and into action. So while we want to sit around and talk about what's nice to do and what we would aspire to do, we've got to take action now, and we have to narrow it down to the small wins. What can we measure now that shows us we're moving in the right direction? And for example, in literacy, we can't say everybody's going to be on grade level, by next year. So you start with growth, and growth is measured at certain points along the year, and we collect that. We don't grade our own homework. We send that over to our research partners at the Urban Education Research Center. But what we do is we set targets collectively, and those give us those micro milestones along the way to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And then when we're not, if we find that we're stalling, then we're back to the table. And what additional resources need to be in place? Maybe has something not been implemented as we said it would be, or there was a gap in the understanding. So we have set some hard and fast numbers that we can measure ourselves. Our funders know that. Our community knows that. And back to the Data Summit, we publicly announce, here is our goal, 10% improvement in literacy in third grade, for example, by X number of years. In our pre-K space for early learning, because that's also one of the areas that we focus on, we're increasing the seats. We currently have 700 seats available to our youngest learners. We're going to add another 100, but we hold ourselves to a metric of kindergarten readiness. Our goal is 90%. We currently sit at 74%. So we're constantly examining how do we get that additional 16%, and what are we not providing as supports that are needed. So again, it doesn't happen in isolation. It is not simply one organization. We are a community rich with a variety of organizations that can help us achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, your answer reminds me of some of my education classes where they talk about process versus product, and you're really talking about the process, that you don't measure solely on what the outcome is, although you have to pay attention to that, obviously. But if you have a process that has fidelity to it, and continually monitor that process, then good things will continue to happen. And I think that's it's really what we should all be looking for when we're trying to improve schools. It's not going to be an overnight change. It's not going to be a quick change. It's going to be a gradual but persistent change. Yeah,
it's complex, and that's one of the things that we spend quite a bit of time helping our community understand. This doesn't happen fast. We're talking about human learning. It's complex.
Yeah,
and we need to be patient.
Yeah. Angelique, it's been wonderful getting a chance to meet you. I assume that if there are other things that you wanted to talk about, you can feel free to jump in if you would like to.
Well, I think it's important. I appreciate you opening up the floor. SchoolSmart, I know I didn't spend a lot of time on all of the areas we cover, but if you think about a student's continuum of learning, starting from birth, because our first teachers are our families, and the success of getting across to graduation, that continuum is where SchoolSmart focuses. So early learning, and then our K-12 journey, and then ensuring that all of our youth graduate with strong opportunities as they leave high school, and that can be university, higher ed. It can also certainly be right into a career that they're ready and excited for. So one thing that drives our team is that education is the one tool that society has that can empower its citizens to be full participants in advocacy and shaping the community that they participate in. And it's my encouragement to those who are wondering how they can support, reach out to educators, to schools, to see how you can help and how you can support. So a call to action I'd love to leave the listeners with is don't be afraid to step in and offer what assets you can bring to the table. So as a community, we get further together than any one individual does alone. So really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the way that you answered that, because I have to say that when I was learning about SchoolSmart Kansas City and then listening to your answers today, I immediately started thinking about what would this look like in a rural area, like where Athens is located. And, we have a similar situation in one sense, where we have a lot of districts in one county that are right next to each other, all facing similar problems, and challenges, but also having similar assets in terms of the families and those sorts of things. What would it look like if we thought more as a region rather than individual district, and how could that galvanize support from the community that doesn't rely on a tax levy every year to be voted upon. I think that's an important thing to consider, and so learning about your organization immediately made me think about that. So I really appreciate that. It's been great getting to meet you. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, it's been my pleasure. Thank you all for listening to Teaching Matters. We will have a link to SchoolSmart Kansas City in the text accompanying the podcast, so you can learn more about the organization, including they have a link on that website that will let you know a little bit more about the summit that she was talking about, which might be great for people to look at to see how you could present important data to your community. So if you want to learn more about SchoolSmart Kansas City, just follow that link. Thanks for listening today. A special thanks to April Koska and Trinity Sweet, associate producers for the podcast. If you have ideas, thoughts, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us on social media or by email at teachingmatterspodcast@ohio.edu. That's all lowercase and all one word after the @ sign and before the @ sign. Thanks for listening, and we hope you all have a great day.